Okay, going to record a video here explaining how to properly trap weave for Marksmanship Hunter and Survival Hunter in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. I've seen people kind of talk about this concept and they know it's something that they do, but they don't understand how to do it actually properly or optimally. And if you don't know this, a lot of times if you just do trap weave following your normal kind of I'm casting abilities, oh, my trap came off CD, I know I need to like be close in melee range, go use the trap, and then continue on with your rotation as normal. If you do that, you're going to end up losing auto shots over the course of a fight, most likely. Or possibly you're going to lose GCDs. And ideally, if you do it properly, you pretty much don't have to lose either of them. It depends. So trapping is a little bit weird and inconsistent because it depends on like the hitbox of the boss or the enemy in general that you're trying to trap weave with. And so there's there's also in sims, like you might have seen some people say 2000 millisecond weave time, for example, in the sims. And so like, where is that coming from? Why is that just a number picked out of thin air or whatever? So this is where it comes from. So this is how to understand hunters basically in Wrath. So normally when you're playing a spec, there's kind of one, I think of it as a musical beat, but there's one timer that you're kind of syncing everything to, which is normally your ability global cooldown. So it's like a 1.5 second timer, and it's just a steady beat. Every 1.5 seconds you're casting an ability. Every 1.5 seconds you're casting an ability. That's what this kind of orange line here is at the top. You can see I've labeled some abilities and things like that. Now, in addition, previously in like other iterations, earlier iterations of Classic in TBC and Classic, your auto shots were dependent on the GCD timer to some extent, because your abilities that you were casting would interrupt your ability for the auto shot to fire until the GCD was over, for example. So that's why like you would have the certain haste breakpoints of steady shot and things like that, because you were trying to fit the GCDs of your abilities in relation to the auto shot timer. In Wrath, that is no longer the case. Your auto shot timer is entirely desynced with your abilities. Whether you're casting abilities or not, this auto shot green kind of bar down here, time is kind of like the x-axis here or whatever. So as we're going forward in time, if I can make like an arrow or something. Well, let's do this. As we're going like, whoops, let's make it green. As we're going forward in time, right, we're like passing direction towards the right. Anyway, it's entirely unrelated whether you're casting abilities or not. It's always going to be a separate timer. But this timer is not synced in a like rational fraction with the global cooldown timer. First of all, it's variable. So it is possible that depending on the ranged weapon speed, sometimes you'll have a weapon that's 2.5 or 2.6 or 2.7, 2.8, 2.9, 3.0, whatever, right? So you have the actual weapon speed itself, but then you also have haste itself as a stat, as a flat value that you have passively, but then you also have dynamic haste, so you have stuff like Aspect of the Hawk, improved Aspect of the Hawk procs, you have Rapid Fire, you have Bloodlust, of course, and then you also just have stuff like a Trinket proc, which gives you haste rating, something like that. So this is variable. It's not a consistent value. It's not something that you can necessarily gear for to make a consistent value, to make this always line up a certain way properly and make the whole rotation like smooth and perfect so that you don't have to consider this stuff anymore. You kind of always have to consider it, is basically the point I'm trying to make. Okay, so to get to the point of the actual big picture point is, what if you are in a situation like this? So these two timers, they're desynced from each other, they're not related to each other at all, but they both keep going kind of independently of each other, right? So at certain times, like for example here at the start of the fight, let's make like a circle or something and just make it, I don't know, like this. So like at the start of the fight here, you can see they're synced up, exactly, right? Your first cast is also when you'll fire your first auto shot. Okay, cool. And then the second GCD of the fight comes earlier than when you fire the first auto shot, right? And then you'll have the third GCD, and then you'll be firing an auto shot. And then the fourth GCD actually comes, you can see this is kind of like a, like 2/3 of time passes in this first section in here. And then the last like 1/3 of time passes in this section here. So you get in like different kind of intermediate points as the fight progresses of where the auto shot fires in relation to the GCD timer. So then here you have the same thing, except here maybe it's now 80-20 or something is the split, like that. And then here maybe it's like, this is like 5 or 10, and here's like 90. And then here we actually have the auto shot then firing again, like before the next GCD. So what you don't want to be ending up is a situation like this where I have the abilities listed here at the top, where you have, I'm going to fire Chimera Shot, I'm going to fire Aim Shot, and then I want to trap. So the first concept to know is that you always want to trap adjacent to instant cast shots. The reason for that is if you can imagine this instead said, let's do it in this color. If this said steady shot, is that I have to be standing still this whole time, and the start of the cast is when the GCD starts or whatever. But then like the steady shot cast pretty much lasts almost the entirety of a GCD. It depends on your haste again. Sometimes it actually lasts a little bit over in a GCD, and you'll actually delay the GCD timer because your steady shots will be like 1.6 or 1.7 seconds. But you know, that's its own separate can of worms. But it doesn't actually affect the point I'm trying to make here, which, if this aim shot was steady shot, as I previously mentioned here, is that you can't then start moving until, let's say, 1.4 seconds after that GCDF cast, and then you only have 0.1 second to move before you need to cast the trap in melee range, right? So you only have 1.1 second to do the distance of going from range to melee, and you won't be able to get all the way into melee in 0.1 second, right? You just physically can't do that. Now the problem is, if you have a situation like this, okay, this looks like a very good example where I can fire an instant cast beforehand, and now I have that whole 1.5 second time where I can move into melee, right? So that's good. We like that, we want that. But the problem is actually the reverse, where for every distance you move in, you also have to move back out, right? So it's not the distance just in that matters to reach melee, but you also then want to reach ranged, and you'll do that literally at the same exact rate as you went in, right? Unless you have some weird movement speed buff that drops off in the middle of this process. But for the most part, you can pretty much assume that the time it takes you to go in is also the same time it takes you to go out. So then you also need another 1.4 seconds before you get back out. And then you can see here, that's how much we've now delayed our auto shot. Is now this auto shot here is now only being fired here, because we had to spend all that time going into trap, or more likely, the scenario is you'll have gone in, and then you'll be in melee range. Here's the point where you could actually trap, but you have to wait for the GCD until you can place the trap, and then you can move out, and it only takes, you know, doesn't take the full amount of time to move back out, but you still delay the GCD by some portion of time, right? And we don't want to do that. So instead what we want to do is, if we're in a situation like this, basically I have to think of how to word this properly. We want our GCD timer to land as in the middle of the auto shots, the green auto shots here, as possible. We don't want the GCD to be similarly timed to when the auto shots are, specifically for the trap GCD, okay? These other GCDs, when it's all desynced like this doesn't matter over here. When they're all desynced and they're not directly in the middle, here it's maybe 80%, here it's like 90%, right? Here it's maybe 1/3, here it's maybe in the earlier third instead of the 2/3 point, right? Like, none of that stuff matters. It only becomes relevant when you have to do the movement into melee for trapping. So instead, if you get in a situation like this, let me figure out an easy way to do this. I don't know if the best way to do this, but we'll do it this way. Sorry, this is kind of scuffed. It's fine. Is instead of trapping on that GCD, because we can see from our timer, because we can look at our auto shot timer and our GCD timer, we can see it's not going to align properly, right? So even in later phases, even with more gear, you will do this, okay? Is when you see this situation happening, and it's going to take practice and habit. You should just literally practice this on a dummy, watching your timers of your auto shot related to your GCD. And if you see you can't really see it super ahead of time, but you can see it maybe here is like when you should start noticing it, is when you're doing like the Chimera aim shot, or the Chimera like instant cast or whatever GCD. You should start looking at where your auto shot timer is in related to it. There might be a Riokaii that comes out that does this math kind of for you ahead of time, and it'll tell you whether it'll line up or not. Hopefully somebody makes that. Hopefully they make that based off this video so they do it properly. Okay, anyway. So what you'll do is, even in later phases, even when you normally stop casting Arcane Shot entirely and Steady Shot takes over, Armor Pen is better. Even in these cases, what you don't want to do is lose an auto shot, right? That's bad. So what you'll do is you'll cast an Arcane Shot here, I should just shorten it to Arcane. You will cast Arcane Shot here, in this place, instead of the trap, and you'll delay the trap by 1 GCD, so that then, and it's because Arcane Shot is an instant cast, you can't do this with Steady Shot, and then you'll do trap here. Actually going to make this red. Then you'll do trap here, and then you'll do steady next, all the way over here, as like the next GCD over in here. Whoops. Right, cool. So that way you have the ability, the time, where you fire off the aim shot, then you have a tiny slight delay before you can fire the auto shot, and then you have that whole time, length of time, where you can move into melee range, get ready to drop the trap, then the trap is in a nice, more even place between the GCDs, and then you have the time to move back out again, and ideally lose as minimal time, or ideally 0 time at all, between the auto shots for you to do the trap weave properly. So you'll occasionally delay the GCD of placing the trap, like, so the GCD comes off cooldown here, right? So it's at like 29, 29.5 seconds, like somewhere in here, have passed since the last GCD or whatever, because it's a 30-second cooldown, somewhere in here. So even though you can cast it this spot, you'll delay it by 1 GCD and cast it here instead, because the delay on the cooldown, realistically, you have to do this delay something like 30 times. Not quite. If you delay it by 1 second each time, you're delaying it by 1.5 seconds. So you have to delay doing that like 20-something times, basically, before you'll ever fully lose a trap cast during the course of a fight, because you can only trap once every 30 seconds, right? So if the fight is lasting 3 minutes and 15 seconds, you kind of have like a little bit of leeway where you can afford to lose some dead time, because the time is dead anyway. You don't want to end the fight and trap be sitting on cooldown or whatever, and it's not like that would have gained you any extra trap damage. Or more realistically, you'll actually only lose like 1 tick of a trap rather than a full trap cast. The more realistic way to think about this is each time you're doing this, you're at most losing 1 tick of trap, but you're gaining the auto shot damage. And you're also having to weigh the difference between steady shotting in place of the arcane shot and just trapping here. But usually the difference between steady shot and arcane shot is so small and so minor. It's a difference of like if you always casted arcane shot versus you always casted steady shot. The difference is relatively minor, especially in early phases where the difference is maybe like 10, 15, 20 DPS at most. Where the gain of not losing auto shots, because your auto shots are only fired every 2 seconds or so. So basically over a 30-second period, you're only getting 15 auto shots. So losing essentially 1/15 of your auto shot damage is a big loss. You don't want to do that. Like your auto shots are a very substantial portion of your damage. They're something like 20% of your damage on their own, 25 maybe. And so yeah, you don't want to lose that damage. You don't want to lose almost 2% damage just by not doing this incorrectly. Now that's a bit of a wrong assumption, because you shouldn't assume that you'll always lose the auto shot every single time you trap, but it's like statistically some percentage of the time you will. And so this is the way to make sure that it never happens. You also won't need to do this arcane delaying every time trap comes off cooldown. So you're not delaying every single trap by 1.5 seconds. You're at most delaying every, let's say, every third trap by 1.5 seconds or something. So on average, you're only delaying each trap itself by 0.5 seconds or something, because you won't have to do this every single time. It's only if the GCD and the auto shot timers don't align favorably that you need to flexibly add in this arcane shot in its place to delay the trap by 1 GCD in order to fit it better in relation to your auto shot timer, so that you don't lose an auto shot as much as possible, or you minimize the loss of an auto shot. You know, maybe instead of losing a full auto shot, you only delay it by 0.2 seconds or something. That's still generally going to be a gain over the course of a fight. So that's how you should think of trap weaving properly. Hopefully this, like, diagramming it out helps it to make sense to people, because I feel like you don't really get a sense of, if you're just watching somebody press buttons, it's like, why did they press arcane shot here? Unless you're super looking at their timers and you super know exactly what the hitbox of the boss is and how far you need to go in to drop it and things like that. So the one last thing I'll add at the end is in your raids, if your raid friends want to help you, is that, for example, I'm firing this arcane shot, and then I don't need to go all the way 1.5 seconds in to get in melee range to trap, and then 1.5 seconds to get out, and then delay my auto shot by this period of time, right? What you'd rather do is basically go in only the amount that you are able to, how should I explain this? You only go in the amount that you have a buffer on the other end to go back out so that it's equal. So you only want to go in like this same amount. So you'll go in like this same amount and then you'll wait, but you can drop the trap outside of melee, right? So I can say here, I'm dropping the trap, and, or here I'm like, I'm not going to move any further. I'm only moving this distance, and then I'm staying here, and I know I'm going to drop the trap as far as I moved in here. I have to wait until this GCD time passes before I can actually place the trap, and then I can move back out. But this trap is now placed outside of the boss hitbox, right? It won't be hit by, it won't go off on its own. But what your friends can do is after you've hit this GCD and you've placed it, you can have your tank move the boss, that extra missing distance here. You can have your tank do that to activate the trap for you. It's somewhat annoying for your melee that they do this. If there's a reason that you need the boss to be in an exact right spot, you would probably not do this. There's other considerations, so you might want to use nitro boots in some weird niche scenarios so that you can do this and lose as minimal downtime as possible and things like that so that you can increase your movement speed. Like, there's all weird tricks that you could get into to, like, optimize this super min-maxy, but the point is, worst case scenario, most of the time, the tank can just move the boss an extra, like, 5 yards for... And everyone else just like slightly adjusts or whatever, the melee, you know, they could call that out ahead of time. You have a whole basically 10-second window where you actually have more than that depending on how you do this, but the trap duration is 20 seconds. And then it has a 30-second cooldown. So you have a 10-second window where it can be delayed by up to 10 seconds and it will fully complete itself before you then drop the next trap. And that's assuming you would drop the next trap and activate it immediately. More likely you could drop the next trap immediately and then wait to activate that one, and etc. So, yeah, you have a full 10 seconds where you can flexibly just like move the boss instead. So you don't have to worry about actually fully moving the full distance of you yourself walking into melee range to the center pixel of the boss hitbox and then all the way back out every single time. Just move in the amount that you can based on the buffer time that you have, based on your auto shot, like relationship to your GCD timer, and then stop moving, and then place the trap, and then move back out, and don't lose auto shots, and then have your tank just move the boss an extra, 5 to 10 yards, or whatever. A lot of bosses already move a fair bit off and on anyway, so it's not that important that the boss stays in, like, the exact right pixel of this spot in the room for the entire rest of the strategy to work. It's like, the boss could move around, you could just kite him in a little circle or in a little triangle back and forth, where... Because then later in the fight, when you have these... for example, let's say the boss moved 5 or 10 yards, you have this whole like section in your rotation, or even just this section, where you have GCDs where you can move around. So you can adjust yourself to then like move ahead of time to where the boss is going to be pulled next, so that you don't lose, so that you can pre-place the trap there and then the boss will get moved there and you're staying at range the whole time. Because what you don't want to have happen is you're in front of the boss, like placing a trap, and then the boss gets moved on top of you, and then now you're melee range, and you're not able to get the auto shots off that way, right? So there's a lot of considerations to this. Anyway, I'm rambling at this point. Hopefully, I got the main important point across. Hopefully there's a WeCore that gets built to do this. I don't know that one exists yet, but you can technically do it manually. There's not really a hard and fast rule where I can say, like, at 0.5 seconds left on your GCD, or on your auto shot timer, if you're at the Chimera GCD, like, then it'll be good, but if it's over 0.5 seconds, it's bad, but if it's less than that, it's good. It's like, it depends too much on the varying haste of, like, the weapon you have and the haste you have from gear, or any procs, or, like, all that type of stuff. So it all kind of messes with this a little bit. The last important point I'll make is, even worst case scenario, this worst case scenario here where you're trapping at this spot over here, and you're in this bad zone. Worst case scenario, losing the auto shot but getting the trap down is still a damage gain, overall. It's just less of a damage gain than it could potentially be. But doing the trap weaving is still better than not doing it at all. Okay? So don't like freak out about this too much and like think it's like the end of the world that like if you don't do this properly you're going to lose like 500 DPS or something. This is a difference of like, I don't know, somewhere in the range of probably 50 DPS at most. It's relatively minor, relatively unnoticeable, except on super large scales and on super large sample sizes. This is for the people that are like wanting to like get top 10 parses basically and stuff like that. This is the stuff that they'll be caring about. So anyway, I'm one of those people. I like min-maxing stuff to the like absolute perfectionist degree or whatever. It's part of the fun for me. Realistically, if you're not at that level, you don't realistically need to worry about this too much. But if it's just fun to know is the potential is out there that you eventually could potentially get to this point or something, I think it's fun to know that that stuff is out there, that there's always kind of more levels that you can improve at and things like that. So anyway, that's all I got. Thanks for watching.